What if everything you've been taught about communication, about defending yourself, justifying your choices, explaining your pain, is the very thing that's been destroying your power? Think about the last time someone questioned you, your job, your decisions, your worth. What did you do? You probably explained yourself. You gave reasons, context, evidence. You built a case for your own existence. And somewhere deep inside, while the words were coming out of your mouth, you felt yourself getting smaller. That feeling isn't random, it's a signal. And today we need to talk about what it really means. There's a silent war being fought right now inside you. Not against your enemies, not against circumstances, against the most dangerous opponent you will ever face, the compulsion to be understood. Most people live their entire lives as prisoners of this compulsion. They wake up, perform for the approval of others, explain, justify, defend, and then wonder why they feel exhausted and invisible. They mistake noise for presence. They mistake explanation for strength, and they die, not physically, but something deeper. They die being misunderstood anyway. Here's the brutal truth. Explaining yourself doesn't make people understand you. It makes them feel powerful over you. Every time you explain, you hand someone the steering wheel of your internal world. You invite their judgment. You offer your psychology as raw material for them to sculpt according to their own fears and projections. The philosopher Epictetus, a man who spent years as an enslaved person and emerged as one of the most psychologically sovereign humans in recorded history, understood this. He said that we suffer not from the events of our lives, but from our judgment about those events. And I would extend that. We suffer not from being misunderstood, but from our obsession with being understood. Picture a man. Let's call him Daniel, 34 years old, intelligent, hard-working. He's at a family dinner, and his uncle makes a comment about the career path Daniel chose, something dismissive, something that stings. And Daniel does what Daniel always does. He explains, he justifies, he pulls out the data about his income, his growth, his 5-year plan. He talks for 11 minutes. His uncle nods. Nothing changes. The sting is still there. And now, on top of the original wound, Daniel has added something else. The humiliation of having tried so hard to be validated by someone who was never going to give it. That night, Daniel lies awake, not because of what his uncle said, but because of what he revealed about himself. His hunger, his fear, his need. He showed his hand. He opened the vault. And for what? This is happening to you too. Maybe not at family dinners, maybe in relationships, in workplaces, in the private court of your own mind where you rehearse arguments with people who aren't even in the room. You're explaining yourself to ghosts. You're defending yourself against verdicts that haven't been issued. You're fighting a war that exists almost entirely inside your nervous system. And why? Because somewhere along the way, you internalized a catastrophic belief that being misunderstood is dangerous, that if people don't understand your reasons, they will think less of you, that their perception of you determines your value. Sigmund Freud called this the compulsion to repeat, the unconscious tendency to recreate the conditions of our original wounds in the hope of resolving them. You weren't understood as a child, your feelings were dismissed, your choices were questioned, your identity was molded by forces that had nothing to do with who you actually were. And so you learned to explain, to justify, to earn the right to exist through performance. But here's what Freud didn't tell you, and what Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest swordsman in Japanese history, demonstrated through decades of solitary mastery. The moment you stop fighting for approval, you become genuinely dangerous. Musashi fought over 60 duels and never lost a single one. But his most famous victory wasn't against an opponent. It was against his own ego. He wrote in the Book of Five Rings that the warrior who needs to demonstrate his power is already weakened by that need. True power, Musashi understood, is self-contained. It radiates. It doesn't announce itself. This is the concept I want you to carry with you for the rest of this video. I call it the silent sovereignty. Silent sovereignty is not the same as suppression. It's not biting your tongue until you explode. It's not playing mind games or being cold and distant as a tactic. It is something far more profound and far more difficult. It is the complete restructuring of the relationship between your identity and other people's perception of you. Let me break this down into its core layers. The first layer is understanding what silence actually communicates. Most people believe that silence is emptiness, that not explaining yourself means you have nothing to say, that you're guilty, that you're hiding something. This is one of the most sophisticated traps the social mind has constructed. In reality, silence under pressure is one of the most advanced psychological signals a human being can emit. When someone challenges you and you respond with calm, measured stillness, you communicate something that no explanation ever could, that their judgment does not determine your reality. Think about the most powerful people you've ever encountered in your life. Not the loudest, not the most aggressive, but the most genuinely powerful. Did they spend time explaining themselves to everyone who questioned them? Or did they move with a kind of quiet certainty that made explanation unnecessary? The second layer is recognizing the addiction. You are addicted to explanation, the same way others are addicted to validation on social media. Each time you successfully justify yourself and someone nods in agreement, your brain releases a small hit of dopamine. The external approval becomes a neurological reward. Over time, you can't function without it. You need the hit. You build your entire identity architecture around the assumption that you are safe only when understood, only when validated, only when the jury is on your side. This addiction is the invisible prison. And like all addictions, the first step out is admitting the depth of the dependency. The third layer is what I call the identity audit. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your current beliefs about yourself were formed in the courtroom of someone else's opinion? How much of what you call your personality is actually an elaborate defense mechanism built to preempt criticism? The psychologist Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we construct for the world. But the mask becomes dangerous when we forget that we are wearing it. When the mask becomes the identity, we lose access to the authentic self. Entirely. Silent sovereignty requires you to identify which parts of your self-expression are genuine and which parts are strategic performances designed to manage other people's reactions. The fourth layer is the practice of letting the narrative live without you. This is the hardest part. When someone tells a story about you, a wrong one, an incomplete one, a cruel one, everything in your psychology screams to correct it, to jump in, to provide the context they're missing. But here's the nothing. Their narrative about you exists in their mind, and their mind is not your territory. You cannot control it. What you can control is whether you empower that narrative by treating it as something that requires your response. Every response is a kind of tribute. It acknowledges the other person's court as a legitimate court. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, a book he never intended for public consumption, a private dialogue with his own soul, that the best revenge is to be nothing like the person who hurt you. I would add, the deepest power is to need nothing from the person who misunderstands you. The fifth layer is rebuilding your internal architecture. This is where the transformation actually lives. Silent sovereignty isn't just the absence of explanation, it's the presence of a deep, unshakable internal reference point, a compass that does not spin when others try to disorient it. This is built through solitude, through confrontation with your own shadows, through the daily practice of choosing your own judgment over the collective verdict. It is built in the moments no one sees, the moments where you could have explained yourself, could have defended yourself, could have sought validation. And you didn't, not because you were suppressing something, but because you no longer needed to. Now I want to speak directly to the resistance that's rising in you right now, because I can feel it. You're thinking, but what about real relationships? What about intimacy? Doesn't vulnerability require explanation? Doesn't love require being known? Yes. And this is the crucial distinction. Silent sovereignty is not about building walls. It is about building foundations. There is a profound difference between choosing to share yourself with someone who has earned that privilege and reflexively explaining yourself to everyone who questions you in an attempt to manage their perception of you. The first is intimacy. The second is anxiety wearing love's clothing. The person you are trying to be understood by, the parent, the colleague, the ex, the stranger online, they are not the court that matters. The only court that matters is the one inside you. And here is the cost of neglecting it. If you spend your entire life managing other people's perception of you, you will one day reach the end and realize you never actually met yourself. You were so busy performing for an audience that you forgot to live the life that would have made the performance unnecessary. Think of Daniel again. 6 months after that dinner, he stops explaining himself. Not because he became cold, not because he built a wall, but because he started doing something radical. He started trusting his own perception of his life. He showed up at the next family gathering. His uncle made another comment, and Daniel simply smiled and moved on. Not from defeat, not from avoidance, from a place of deep, settled certainty that his uncle's understanding of his life was genuinely completely irrelevant to the quality of that life. That night, Daniel slept deeply for the first time in years, because the war had ended, not because he had won, but because he had stopped fighting on that battlefield entirely. That is what silent sovereignty looks like in practice. It is not dramatic. It is not performative. It is not cold. It is the quiet, unannounced arrival of a person who has finally decided to stop auditioning for their own life. The question is not whether you're capable of this. You are. The question is whether you're willing to grieve what you have to give up to get there. The dream of being fully understood. The fantasy that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, the right people will finally see you. That dream is beautiful, and it is also the most sophisticated cage ever constructed. What you gain on the other side is worth more than that dream could ever be. You gain the only thing that was ever real, your own uncontested presence in your own existence. If this landed somewhere true in you, I want you to write one word in the comments. Sovereign. Not as a performance, not for the algorithm, but as a private declaration to yourself that you heard this, that something shifted, that the war is ending. This channel exists for one reason, to help you build the psychological and philosophical architecture for a life that doesn't require anyone else's approval to feel real. If that's the kind of work you want to do on yourself, then subscribe. Because we're just getting started. The most powerful thing you'll ever say is nothing. And the most powerful person you'll ever become is the one who no longer needs you to believe that.